When my mother-in-law lifted that crystal glass above my head and whispered, "Stand still, so everyone can see what kind of woman my son married," I thought she was joking. But then the red wine fell, slow, heavy, deliberate, running down my face while the entire Christmas gala watched in silence. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't give her the satisfaction. She smiled, proud of herself, and said loud enough for all her executives to hear, "Now, she looks more like her place in this family." And the worst part wasn't the wine. It was knowing my husband stood right there and did absolutely nothing. Before I begin the story, please tell me where in the world you're watching from. And please follow me to the end, because this is how self-respect speaks louder than revenge. I remember the music playing, soft jazz echoing through the ballroom, the chandeliers glowing like stars hanging above people who would never understand someone like me. I had spent weeks choosing my dress, smoothing my curls, reminding myself that his family's Christmas gala was supposed to be a celebration, not a battlefield. But from the moment I walked in, I felt their eyes, his cousins whispering, his aunts judging, and his mother scanning me like a stain she wished she could scrub off the family name. I tried to smile. I tried to breathe. I tried to remind myself that love means patience. But patience becomes a wound when the people you're trying to respect treat you like you aren't even human. My husband brushed my arm when no one was watching, whispering, "Just get through tonight, babe," like I was a child who needed to behave. But when his mother called him over, he ran to her like a little boy, desperate for approval. You'd think after all these years he'd choose the woman who slept beside him, not the woman who still controlled his every breath. But no, not that night, not ever. I knew something was wrong when the room went quiet, as if the air itself was waiting. His mother walked toward me with that perfect ice-cold smile, holding a crystal goblet filled with deep red wine. People stepped aside like she was royalty making her grand entrance. "You wore white," she said sweetly, her voice slicing through me. "Bold, considering where you come from." Before I could answer, she tilted the glass. The wine fell. Gasps echoed. The room froze. My husband whispered my name, but not to defend me. No, cariño. Just to tell me to calm down, as if I had done something wrong. I stood there with wine dripping down my shoulders, the scent staining my skin, my heart pounding against a lifetime of memories where women like me had to stay quiet to survive. But instead of cracking, something inside me hardened. His mother laughed, turning to her guests. "Don't worry, everyone. It's just a little holiday fun. She's used to cleaning up messes." They laughed with her. The executives, the shareholders, the people whose bonuses my work had helped fund. They all laughed. I wanted to walk out, but the humiliation glued my feet to the polished floor. I remembered all the nights I stayed late at the company to help my husband finish proposals, all the holidays I missed with my own family just to attend theirs, all the times his mother looked at my brown skin and saw a servant, not a daughter-in-law, and suddenly all the years of swallowing pain tasted bitter on my tongue. When I finally lifted my head, I saw her recording me with her phone, like my humiliation was her Christmas gift to herself. "Smile," she said. "This will make a great family memory." And just like that, something inside me snapped quietly, cleanly. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, stood tall, and said, "Thank you. You've just made everything very clear for me." She didn't understand, not yet, but she would, because humiliation, mi amor, is a seed. And when it lands in the heart of a woman who has held everything together for too long, it grows into something unstoppable. 3 days later, every board member in her precious company received an email, a single document attached, a financial audit I had completed months earlier, the one she ordered my husband to hide so her small accounting adjustments would never reach regulators. I had kept a copy, quietly, carefully, patiently, and I sent it exactly when she least expected it. You should have seen her face at the emergency meeting. The same people who laughed with her that night couldn't look her in the eye. Fraud investigations, frozen accounts, her position stripped, her reputation gone in one sweep. Christmas lights still hung in the hallway when she was escorted out of her own building. My husband tried to yell at me, tried to call me ungrateful, dramatic, emotional. I let him talk until he ran out of breath. Then, I handed him the divorce papers I had already signed. "You stood there," I said softly, "and watched your mother pour wine on me like I was nothing. And now, I'm done being nothing to this family." The last time I saw his mother, she looked at me with that same icy stare she always used. But this time, she wasn't the powerful matriarch. She was just a woman facing consequences she thought she'd never meet. And that, cariño, is the thing about people who think they can humiliate you without consequences. They always forget one simple truth. The quietest woman in the room is usually the one holding the match. 3 days after I handed him the divorce papers, I drove through the quiet streets of my childhood neighborhood with nothing but the echo of that Christmas gala still clinging to me like the scent of that wine. The sun was setting behind the low adobe houses, casting long golden shadows across the sidewalks where I once played hopscotch with my cousins. Every corner of that street held a memory of a girl who believed the world was kinder than it actually was. My mother was standing at the door when I arrived, her arms folded gently, as if she had been waiting for the exact moment. My car turned into the driveway. She didn't ask questions. She didn't force words out of me. She simply opened her arms. And the moment my cheek touched her shoulder, everything I had been holding inside, every breath, every tremble, every humiliation poured out of me in silence, not in tears, just silence, the kind that says more than crying ever could. "Mija," she whispered, stroking my hair like she did when I was little. "Even a strong woman breaks when she has been holding too much for too long. You're home now. Breathe." And for the first time since that night, I did. Inside, the familiar smell of cinnamon and vanilla wrapped around me like a blessing. My mother brewed café con leche the way only she knew how. Slow, patient, full of love that didn't need to be spoken. She placed the cup in front of me, sat down quietly, and touched my hand. "Tell me when you're ready." It took me a long moment to find my voice. But when I did, the story spilled out of me in one steady stream. The ice-cold smile on my mother-in-law's face, the weight of the wine sliding down my skin, the laughter of executives who thought cruelty was entertainment, the way my husband stood there, useless and loyal, only to the woman who birthed him. My mother listened with her eyes closed, jaw tight, hands still, absorbing every word like a wound she wished she could take from me. When I finished, she exhaled deeply, almost trembling. Ay, Dios. They forgot who you came from. She meant my father. When the front door opened and he stepped in, I felt the room shift. My father never needed to raise his voice to command a space. His presence was enough. Steady, deliberate, deeply rooted in the quiet power of a man who had built everything he owned without ever stepping on another soul. He hugged me, kissed my forehead, and then looked at me the way only fathers can look at their daughters, like they can see both the child and the woman inside her at the same time. Tell me, he said softly. So I told him again, from start to finish, not because he needed to hear it twice, but because saying it to him felt like placing the truth in the hands of someone who would protect it. When I reached the part where my mother-in-law lifted her phone to record me, something in his eyes changed. Not anger, not shock, something colder. She recorded you? The question was quiet, but deep enough to shake something inside me. I nodded. My father sat down across from me and tapped one finger against the table. It was the same gesture he used whenever he was calculating, strategizing, deciding how to move entire mountains without letting the world see the effort. Then he stood, went to his study, and returned with a leather-bound folder I had never seen before. Mija, he said, placing it gently in front of me. I think it's time. You understand why your mother and I never worried about your future, only about your happiness. Inside the folder were documents, company filings, investment portfolios, international holdings, board seats across industries I didn't even recognize. My breath caught. My parents weren't just comfortable. They weren't just stable. They were powerful in a way that was quiet, intentional, and deeply buried under layers of humility. Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried years of wisdom. Because we wanted you to grow into your strength without thinking it came from our money. And we wanted your husband to love you for your heart, not your bank account. My mother nodded. And now, after what they did to you, you deserve to know the truth. Your bloodline does not belong beneath anyone's feet. That night, after dinner, my parents called a family meeting. My uncles, my aunts, my cousins, everyone gathered around the long dining table. Not in chaos, not in anger, but in unity. I told them the full story. They listened without interruption. When I finished, my uncle Raphael, the quietest of them all, spoke first. The Harrington Company is collapsing. Their hush stocks are sinking faster than they can lie to the public. We've been monitoring them since the audit hit. My father added, their leadership is weak, their structure is rotting, and their arrogance has blinded them. They won't survive what's coming. I looked between them, confused. Why are we even talking about their company? My mother leaned forward, her voice soft but sharp. Because, Mija, the best revenge isn't humiliation. It's elevation. And you will rise so high they'll have to look up just to remember who you are. My father opened another file. Charts, forecasts, acquisition strategies, all meticulously prepared. We can buy them, he said, piece by piece, through different channels, quietly, legally, elegantly. But the choice, he tapped the papers toward me. The choice is yours. I stared at those documents, at the outlines of a plan that would shift the ground beneath the very family who once poured wine on me to prove I was beneath them. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. Calm, like the ocean just before the tide begins to pull back. I don't want revenge, I said softly. Not the way they understand it. I want justice. I want power. I want dignity. My father nodded. Then that, mija, is exactly what we will take. And as the room grew quiet, and my family watched me with pride and expectation, I realized something profound. I wasn't planning how to ruin them. I was planning how to reclaim myself. Because some wars aren't fought with fists or fury. Some are fought with silence, with patience, with strategy, with power that moves like a shadow until it becomes the only thing left standing. And that night, under the soft glow of my mother's kitchen lights, I decided I would no longer be the woman who survived their cruelty. I would become the woman who ended their kingdom. The next morning, I woke to the soft hum of voices drifting down the hallway, the scent of brewing coffee mixing with the faint aroma of warm tortillas on the stove. My parents had been awake for hours. Latino parents always rise before the sun, especially when something is weighing on their hearts. I walked into the dining room expecting a quiet breakfast, but instead, I found my father, my uncle Raphael, and my aunt Luciana sitting around the table with folders, laptops, and documents neatly arranged in a grid that looked more like a war map than a business discussion. My father motioned for me to sit. Mija, today you will understand what you were born into, not to use it for pride, but to use it for purpose. He opened the first folder. Inside were blueprints of buildings, photographs of commercial properties, lists of tenants, maps of multi-state developments. Our real estate division, he said, started by your abuelito when he bought 3 small apartment buildings after the factory laid him off because they didn't want a brown man supervising the floor. He refused to let discrimination be the period at the end of his story. He tapped the picture of an aging brick building. This was the beginning. Today, he slid a second folder toward me, thicker, heavier. We own over 200 properties across the southwestern states. Residential, commercial, industrial. Mostly under shell companies, mostly invisible to people who assume families like ours don't know how to build empires. I blinked, stunned. My father's voice remained calm, steady, almost gentle. People see our little neighborhood bakery and assume that's the extent of what we have. And we let them assume. Because protection, mija, sometimes means silence. Uncle Raphael opened the next set of documents. Shipment routes, transportation contracts, supply chain partnerships. Logistics, he added. We started by helping small businesses transport goods when the big companies ignored Latino communities. Now, we run the largest privately owned distribution network from California To Texas. He pointed at a map with red lines stretching across the states like veins. This is how our bloodline moves. Quietly, efficiently, relentlessly. Then came the third folder, the heaviest of all. Balance sheets, fund structures, acquisition histories, equity stakes in companies I recognized from national headlines. My Aunt Luciana gave me a soft smile. Private equity, she said. We buy struggling companies, restructure leadership, give opportunities to people who were overlooked. We don't brag about it because bragging attracts enemies. I leaned back, absorbing the magnitude of what lay before me. All this time, I thought my parents lived modestly because they didn't have more. But the truth was far more powerful. They lived simply because simplicity protected them, protected us. Why hide all of this? I whispered. Why stay quiet when you could stand tall? My father folded his hands. Because standing tall is dangerous when the world is determined to cut you down for the color of your skin, he said. When your abuelito started buying property, people tried to take it from him. Banks denied him loans he qualified for. Competitors vandalized his sites. One of them even told him, "Men like you aren't meant to own anything." So he learned something important. Power doesn't need to shout. It needs to wait. The word settled into my chest like a stone. Heavy, true, ancient. My mother entered the room just then, carrying a tray of food, her presence softening the intensity of the discussion, but not diminishing it. She placed a warm hand on my shoulder. We come from a line of people who survived by being underestimated, she said gently. Our strength is not in being loud. It's in knowing when to move. I thought about my mother-in-law, her sharp tongue, her arrogant posture, her need to display power with crystals, chandeliers, and cruelty. Everything she had was loud, performative, superficial. And everything my family built was deep, steady, rooted. She tried to bury me in humiliation, not realizing she was pushing me back toward the very ground where my strength was grown. My father slid a different folder forward, one labeled with the name of my husband's family company. This, he said, is the wounded beast. Inside were stock charts free-falling in red, articles speculating leadership collapse, leaked internal memos showing panic among board members. Your audit destroyed their credibility, my father said. What your mother-in-law called small accounting adjustments were actually years of concealed financial misconduct. They're exposed now. Investors are leaving. Trust is gone. A strange mix of pain and vindication washed through me. I didn't enjoy their suffering, but I couldn't deny the justice in it. We could acquire them, Uncle Raphael said, tapping a page showing projected valuations. Quietly, piece by piece, through multiple entities. No one would see it coming until it's too late. Aunt Luciana added, your mother-in-law built her empire on appearances, on the belief that no one outside her circle had the intelligence or resources to challenge her. She would never suspect a Latino family, especially not the one she tried to humiliate, of being capable of a corporate takeover. I let out a long breath. If we do this, what happens to them? My father didn't smile. He simply looked at me with sincerity. Whatever you choose, mija, we will follow your lead. My mother placed a warm cup of coffee in front of me and lowered herself to my side. Mija, she whispered, her voice tender but edged with fire. You cannot heal by shrinking, and you cannot honor your ancestors by letting those who hurt you walk away unchanged. She lifted my chin gently. A Latina woman does not destroy with rage. She destroys with elegance. The room went still. Her words curled around my heart like a flame that did not burn, but illuminated. I looked down at the documents, at the thousands of tiny pathways that led toward one undeniable truth. The woman they tried to belittle was capable of becoming their new owner, not through vengeance, through rightful power. My mother-in-law used her influence to humiliate me, I murmured. She thought I was beneath her. She thought I was alone. I lifted my eyes to my family, to the quiet empire sitting around me. But she didn't know the bloodline I come from. My father nodded once, solemnly. So tell us, mija, do we begin the acquisition? I breathed in deeply, letting the weight of my future settle on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as armor. Yes, I said softly, feeling the earth shift beneath me. But we do it the way our family has always moved. Quiet, patient, unstoppable. My mother squeezed my hand. Good, she whispered, because the world may fear loud power, but it always bows to silent strength. And in that moment, I understood the truth of my lineage. I was not just the woman who survived humiliation. I was the woman who would inherit an empire and use it to end another. In the days that followed, I watched the downfall of my husband's family unfold not with glee, not with vengeance, but with a strange, calm curiosity, like watching a once impenetrable mansion reveal its rot one brick at a time. Their golden world, the one I had been forced to bow to for years, began to crack under the weight of its own arrogance. At first, the news trickled in quietly. A small article here, a rumor there, whispers of a financial irregularity at Harrington Holdings. But by the end of the week, the whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into headlines, and the headlines exploded into a storm the family could no longer contain. Their Christmas gala scandal had already made its rounds online, but the humiliation they poured over me in that room was nothing compared to what the world was now pouring over them. Investors panicked. Reporters circled like hungry vultures. Shareholders demanded emergency meetings. For years, my mother-in-law had built her empire on the illusion of perfection. Her perfectly curated image, her carefully crafted narrative of superiority, her unshakable belief that her money could bury any truth she didn't want to confront. But arrogance is a fragile fortress. All it takes is one crack for the whole wall to crumble. I heard from a former colleague at the company that the offices were chaos. People were running around with documents clutched to their chests, lawyers filling conference rooms, executives screaming into phones. Someone joked that the walls themselves felt like they were sweating. I imagined my mother-in-law sitting in her corner office, her hands shaking just slightly as she tried to maintain the calm authority she was famous for. She was a woman who had always controlled the story, shaped the narrative, silenced every voice that threatened her reign. But now, the story had slipped out of her hands, and the world was writing her downfall without asking for permission. My husband, yes, technically, he was still my husband until the court finalized the papers, called me dozens of times. At first, with anger, then frustration, then panic. "You don't understand what you've done," he said in one voicemail. "My mother is furious. The board is furious. Everything is falling apart." In another, his voice cracked. "Please, just talk to me. I'm scared." I listened, but I didn't respond. His fear was not my burden anymore. He had stood silent the night his mother drenched me in humiliation. Now he could drown in the consequences of his silence. Meanwhile, I watched my family move with quiet precision, each step calculated, each decision deliberate. Our lawyers monitored the stock decline. Our analysts tracked investor behavior. Our acquisition teams began purchasing shares through multiple anonymous entities, small enough to avoid suspicion, steady enough to build power. We were gathering stones while their kingdom collapsed, preparing to build something new from the ashes they never thought could burn. Then the news broke. My mother-in-law was removed as chairwoman of the board. An internal investigation had uncovered years of financial manipulation, misreporting, and misuse of funds. They called it mismanagement. I called it karma. She blamed everyone but herself: the auditors, the executives, the media, even her own son. And I knew exactly how she looked saying it: chin raised, eyes sharp, lips curled in righteous indignation. The same expression she wore when she told me I should be grateful her son married someone from my background. But power built on cruelty cannot survive the truth. The board demanded she step back from all leadership roles until further notice. Her resignation was framed as voluntary. But nothing about that woman ever was voluntary. The day she cleared out her office, my former colleague sent me a photo. My mother-in-law walking down the hallway, surrounded by security, her expensive heels clicking against the marble floors she once believed she owned. Seeing it, I felt no joy, only closure. Humiliation had finally found its way home. My husband reached out again, begging me to meet him. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Not for him, but for myself. I needed to see the truth without the mask I had been trying to love. We met at a small cafe near his office, and when he walked in, he was a ghost of the polished man I once married. His tie was crooked, his eyes were bloodshot, and the confidence he wore like armor had been stripped away by days of failure. He sat across from me, fingers trembling around his coffee cup. "I miss you," he whispered. I didn't answer. He tried again. "I didn't defend you that night because I didn't want to embarrass my mother." The words hung in the air like smoke, toxic, suffocating. I nodded slowly, letting the truth settle between us. "Do you hear yourself?" I asked quietly. "You were willing to watch me be humiliated so she wouldn't feel embarrassed. And now that she's losing everything, now you come to me?" He swallowed hard. "I know I made mistakes." I met his eyes, calm and unshaken. "You didn't make mistakes," I said softly. "You made choices. Choices that told me exactly where I stood in your world." He had no response, only silence. And for the first time, I felt nothing for him. Not anger, not love, not grief, just freedom. A week later, the company's board sent an urgent email to shareholders announcing a crisis meeting. They needed to stabilize the company. They needed capital. They needed a savior. They didn't know that the savior was already in motion, hiding behind layers of shell corporations, investment firms, and silent partners. My family had already collected nearly 20% of the company. Quiet power, patient power, the kind that never needs to announce itself until it's ready to strike. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, my father placed a new folder in front of me. "We're close," he said. "Once we pass 30%, we control the vote. Once we pass 50, we control the future." I traced my fingers along the edges of the documents, feeling the weight of destiny pressing into my palms. The woman who once stood frozen, while red wine drenched her skin, was now becoming the woman who would own the very company behind her humiliation. My mother sat beside me, squeezing my hand. "Mija," she whispered, "remember this. A Latina woman's strength isn't measured by how loud she fights, but by how deeply she rises. And you," she touched my cheek with pride, "you are rising higher than any of them ever imagined." And as the walls of their golden world continued to crumble, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The quietest woman they ever tried to break was becoming the most dangerous force they had ever awakened. The weeks that followed moved with a strange, suspended quiet, like the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something it could sense but not yet see. Winter was fading into early spring, but inside the world of Harrington Holdings, everything was frozen. Their stocks trembled, their executives panicked, their board members scrambled to find footing on ground that was slipping beneath them like melting ice. And through it all, my family and I moved like shadows, silent, strategic, unstoppable. Our lawyers finalized more acquisitions. Our shell companies multiplied like soft footprints in deep snow, each one leading to a different angle of ownership, but all converging toward one truth: control. By the end of the first month, we held 28% of the company. By the second month, 35. Not enough to cause suspicion to erupt publicly, but enough for whispers to swirl in their boardrooms. One evening, as I sat at the long wooden table where my father had taught me math as a child, he placed another stack of reports in front of me. "Congratulations, Mija," he said with a warm, steady pride. "You are now the largest private shareholder." I stared at the papers. Numbers, signatures, seals. They didn't look like power. They didn't feel like revenge. They felt like clarity. My mother poured coffee into the cup beside me, her hands moving gently, almost ceremonially. "People who harm others always believe their actions disappear," she murmured. "But they forget that life has a way of keeping receipts." She smiled softly, her eyes shining with something deeper than satisfaction. "And you, Mija, you are the one collecting what they owe." She wasn't wrong. Every share purchased felt less like a weapon and more like an answer. An answer to nights I spent swallowing hurt, to days I lived trying to prove I belonged, to years I let myself believe that love meant enduring disrespect. Silence had protected my family for generations. Now, Silence was becoming the very thing that would dismantle theirs. As our ownership grew, the Harrington Company began to tremble from the inside. The board called emergency meetings. Analysts demanded explanations. Investors pleaded for transparency. But my mother-in-law, still convinced she remained untouchable, dismissed it all as market volatility. She didn't know she was being outplayed by the very woman she believed was beneath her. One afternoon, while I was reviewing acquisition documents with our attorneys, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, shaky, strained, spoke. "Mrs. Harrington?" The name stung, but I let it pass. "Yes," I said softly. A long pause, then, "I'm calling because, well, we've been told that a major shareholder has been accumulating stock at an alarming rate. We're trying to understand who's behind it. Do you, by any chance, know anything?" It was one of the board directors. I recognized his voice from the gala. The same man who had laughed when the wine splashed across my skin, whispering something like, "These people always overreact." Now he sounded like a man drowning, reaching for any piece of driftwood. I considered my words carefully. "I'm not involved in your company anymore," I said calmly, "and even if I were, you never listened to me when I was." He swallowed hard. "We're desperate. The company might not survive another quarter like this." I let the silence stretch, slow, heavy, the way silence feels when it becomes a teacher. Finally, I replied, "Maybe the company is failing because the wrong people were running it." And before he could respond, I ended the call. My mother overheard the last part and nodded, a quiet approval in her eyes. "You don't need anger, mija," she said. "You just need truth. Truth cuts deeper than rage ever could." The next turning point came unexpectedly. A global investment firm, one known for aggressive takeovers, announced interest in acquiring a significant portion of Harrington Holdings. The announcement shook the financial world, and the board convened a desperate all-night meeting to strategize how to protect themselves. They scrambled for allies, for capital, for anything that might help them hold on. But they didn't know that the investment firm making the bid was ours. A shell of a shell. A mask behind another mask. My family had orchestrated the move not to truly buy through force, but to corner them into revealing their weaknesses. When a desperate animal has nowhere left to run, it exposes every wound, every flaw, every vulnerability. And that was exactly what happened. Internal emails leaked. Confidential reports emerged. Lawsuits from former employees resurfaced. Regulators reopened old investigations. Their corporate walls weren't just cracking. They were falling apart like brittle plaster under a storm. My father, ever the strategist, presented the final phase of our plan during one of our late-night strategy sessions. "Once they see they have no allies left," he said calmly, "they will be forced to welcome new leadership. And that leadership," he tapped a neatly organized stack of proxy documents, "will be you." My breath caught. "Me?" He nodded. Who better to lead them than the woman who saw the truth before anyone else did? The woman who already survived their cruelty and rose stronger? My mother placed her hand over mine, her eyes glowing with fierce maternal pride. "Mija, listen to me. A Latina woman does not rise to destroy. She rises to restore. Her voice softened, deepening with a warmth that tightened my chest. You were not meant to stay small in a room that mocked you. You were meant to own the room they thought you didn't belong in. Her words struck something sacred inside me, an ancestral memory, a whisper of all the women who came before me. Women who loved fiercely, endured quietly, and rose powerfully. Over the next weeks, acquisition calls became routine. Our lawyers met daily with regulatory experts. Our investment entities buttoned up their positions. Every time we crossed another percentage threshold, my heart shifted. Less pain, more purpose. Less memory of humiliation, more vision of transformation. Meanwhile, the Harrington family grew more frantic. My mother-in-law held a press conference attempting to project strength, but cracks showed in every word she spoke. My husband, no longer wearing expensive suits, no longer holding his head high, looked like a man walking through the ashes of his former life. They were losing the company. They were losing control. They were losing everything they once used to measure their worth. And still, they never suspected me. Not once. That was the power of a quiet woman. That was the danger of underestimating someone who has learned to listen, observe, and strike only when the moment is right. By the end of the quarter, our holdings reached 49%. Enough to command influence. Enough to demand answers. Enough to call a vote. As I signed the final document, completing our position, my mother stood behind me, resting her hand gently on my shoulder. Mija, she whispered, her voice low and warm like a prayer passed down through generations. Remember this. The world is not afraid of loud men. It is afraid of quiet women who know their worth. I closed the folder, and the moment I did, I knew the silent acquisition was complete. The next move was mine. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world is soft enough for truth to surface, I often found myself sitting alone at my parents' dining table, staring at the glowing spreadsheets and market reports that told the unfolding story of the Harrington downfall. The numbers were steady, predictable, almost rhythmic. Declining stock prices, rising volatility, shrinking investor confidence. It was strange how something so cold, so mathematical, could hold the echoes of every insult, every humiliation, every wound my mother-in-law had ever carved into my skin. But the numbers did not lie. The numbers were justice. One morning, around 4:17 a.m., I received an encrypted update from our acquisition team. Another 5% had been secured through an overseas fund. With that, our position climbed to 54%, not just control, but dominion. I stared at the notification for a long moment, letting it sink into my bones. The girl who once stood frozen under a rain of wine had just become the controlling owner of the empire, built by the woman who poured it. But power didn't feel the way I thought it would. It didn't roar. It didn't blaze. It hummed, quiet, steady, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Later that morning, during our family briefing, my father showed me a report outlining the internal fractures happening at Harrington Holdings. Executives resigning, department heads leaking information to the press. 3 investors threatening lawsuits. Their fortress wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing from the inside out. And yet, somehow, they still had no idea whose hand was guiding the fall. My father tapped the table gently. "This is the moment we stay silent," he said. "When your enemy is panicking, you do not reveal your face. You let them unravel with their own hands." My mother nodded beside him. Arrogant people always destroy themselves faster than others can destroy them. Around noon that day, I got another call, this one from a senior board member, his voice trembling, masking desperation behind a thin veneer of authority. "Mrs. Harrington, we've discovered a foreign entity attempting to stage a hostile takeover. We need your support to protect the company." The irony nearly made me smile. They wanted my support to protect them from me. But I kept my tone soft, almost sympathetic. "I hope you find the help you need," I answered. "But I'm afraid I'm no longer involved." I could almost hear his heart drop through the phone. That evening, our legal teams completed the final layer of protection: anonymous trusts, silent voting rights, contingency provisions. Everything was carefully structured to pass scrutiny if they ever tried to trace who was swallowing their empire. My family worked like artisans, sculpting the takeover with the precision of a centuries-old craft. The Harringtons had always believed money was power, but they never understood that strategy is power. Patience is power. Bloodline is power. 3 days later, another wave of shares became available when 2 major investors decided to liquidate their positions to avoid the sinking ship. We bought them all before the Harringtons even woke up. That purchase alone shifted the landscape of their world forever. They were now minority owners in the company they once ruled. That same afternoon, I stepped into a boutique near our neighborhood mall, needing a dress for the family photo we took every spring. As the seamstress measured me, she chatted about the latest news. "Have you heard about the Harrington scandal?" she asked. "They say some mysterious investor is tearing them apart from the inside. Imagine that! A family with all that power being crushed by someone they can't even see." I held the hem of the dress between my fingers, smoothing the fabric. "Sometimes," I said softly, "people don't realize how small they are until they stand next to someone they underestimated." She laughed lightly, not realizing the weight of what I meant. That night, as we gathered again in my parents' dining room, my Aunt Luciana reviewed the final acquisition map. "We control 71% of voting rights now," she said. "They cannot make a move without us." My father turned to me. "Everything is in place, mija. Tomorrow, the board will receive notice of a new majority owner. And after that, they will request a meeting. The question now is not whether we can take control. The question is what you want to do with it." I felt a strange stillness in my chest, the kind that comes not from fear, but from clarity. All my life, I had been taught to be respectful, patient, forgiving. But forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation. And some wounds do not heal through kindness. They heal through empowerment. Before I could answer, my mother stepped closer, cupping my face gently in her warm hands. Her eyes glowed, full of the strength passed down through generations of women who carried fire in their bones and grace in their breath. "Mija," she whispered, "never forget this. Una mujer latina no destruye con ruido, destruye con presencia. A Latina woman doesn't destroy with noise, she destroys with presence. Her words wrapped around me like armor, soft, warm, unbreakable. In that moment, everything aligned. My past, my pain, my bloodline, my purpose. I turned to my father. "Schedule the meeting," I said. "It's time they learn who really owns what they tried to break." And my father, who had always known I would one day step into my power, nodded once, steady, proud, certain. "Así será," he murmured. "So it shall be." That night, for the first time in months, I slept without the weight of humiliation crushing my chest. Because now, I wasn't the woman standing under a rain of wine. I wasn't the woman begging for respect in a room that never intended to give it. I was the woman walking quietly toward a kingdom she was about to take. And the most dangerous thing about me was the thing they never saw. I didn't need revenge. I needed justice. And justice was already on its way. The day before the board meeting, the city felt strangely hushed, as if the air itself understood something irreversible was about to unfold. I woke early, long before dawn, and stepped out onto my parents' small back porch. The sky was still dark, a deep indigo stretching endlessly above me. And for a moment, I let the silence settle over my skin. I wasn't the same woman who had walked out of that Christmas gala with wine dripping down her shoulders. Something had hardened inside me. Something had awakened. And yet, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. I felt direction. I felt the sharp, cold focus of a woman who had survived humiliation and was now walking deliberately toward the throne she never asked for, but one she fully deserved. Later that morning, my phone buzzed with a familiar name. My husband. Or rather, the man who used to call himself my husband. I let it ring until it stopped. He called again and again. On the fourth attempt, I answered, not out of affection, but out of a quiet curiosity for how far he had fallen. His voice trembled the moment he heard mine. "Please, can we talk?" I didn't speak. I wanted him to feel the weight of the silence he once used against me. "Everything is falling apart," he whispered, breath uneven. "My mother, the company, I don't know what to do. I don't know who to trust." His words wrapped around me like smoke, thick, clinging, but powerless. "You had someone to trust," I finally replied. "You just chose not to defend her." I could almost hear his heart breaking. Good. Let the truth pierce him the way silence pierced me that night. But before he could respond, I added softly, "Take care of yourself," and ended the call. Closure didn't need cruelty. It needed firmness. That afternoon, I received a confidential update from our legal team. The Harrington family had hired a private investigator to uncover the identity of the new majority shareholder. They were searching through paperwork, reviewing every foreign fund, interrogating brokers. They were desperate, scrambling, clawing for answers in a maze we had built with precision, and a maze they would never escape. The investigator found nothing. Who would ever suspect that the quiet Latina girl they once dismissed at family dinners, the woman whose brown skin they mocked, the daughter-in-law they treated like furniture, was the one controlling their fate? That's the thing about arrogance. It blinds you long before it destroys you. Later that evening, I encountered something unexpected. I decided to visit the small cafe where I used to write reports after work, back when I still tried to impress my husband's family. The barista, a young Latina girl with bright eyes and tired hands, recognized me immediately. "Senora Morton," she exclaimed softly. "I saw the video. The gala. What they did to you." I felt heat crawl up my throat, not from shame, but from remembering the sting of humiliation. Before I could respond, she placed her hand over mine. "You stood there with so much dignity," she whispered. "You didn't break. Women like us, we need examples like you." Her words hit me in a place I didn't know, still felt tender. I squeezed her hand gently. "Mija," I murmured, "strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like standing still while someone tries to crush you and refusing to bend." She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. That moment reminded me why this fight mattered. Not for revenge, not for money, for every woman who had ever been silenced, dismissed, underestimated. That night, the Harrington building lit up like a battleground. Reporters crowded outside, speculating wildly about the mysterious takeover. Journalists made dramatic predictions. Financial analysts debated whether the company would survive. And inside those glass walls, panic rippled like a storm. I heard from an insider that the CFO had resigned. 2 directors were considering stepping down. Employees were emailing resumes in every direction. Even Melissa, the woman who once draped herself in silk and superiority, was seen shouting at a security guard because he wouldn't let her into a restricted meeting. Meanwhile, my family remained serene. My father reviewed final documents with the ease of a man folding laundry. My mother cooked dinner as though we weren't about to reshape the destiny of an entire corporation. They weren't calm because they didn't care. They were calm because they had been fighting battles like this for generations. Quiet wars against discrimination, against dismissal, against erasure. They had learned long ago that true power doesn't need to roar. It simply stands. At around 10:30 p.m., as I sat reviewing the voting structure for the meeting, my mother approached carrying 2 mugs of warm chocolate con canela. She placed one in front of me and sat beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "Mija," she said gently, "there is something you must remember before tomorrow." I looked at her, waiting. Her voice softened into something ancient, something sacred. "A woman who has been hurt is dangerous. But a woman who has been hurt and remains gentle, she is unstoppable." Her words slid into my soul like a key into a long locked door. I breathed them in slowly, letting them settle into my bones. Finally, I understood what she meant. Gentleness is not weakness. Gentleness is control. The clock ticked closer to midnight when our attorneys confirmed the final detail. The Harrington board had officially scheduled a meeting for 11 o'clock the next morning. "They are expecting a representative from the majority shareholder," our lead attorney explained. "But they still have no idea who that is." He looked at me, eyes filled with a mixture of awe and respect. "Tomorrow, the mask comes off." After he left, I stood alone by the window, watching the city lights flicker like tiny stars trapped in glass. Somewhere across town, My mother-in-law was probably pacing her mansion, shouting orders, demanding explanations, insisting that she was still in control of something already slipping through her fingers. She would never admit it aloud, but part of her had always feared women like me. Women who come from humble roots, who rise quietly, who cannot be intimidated by wealth because they were raised on strength. She feared me not because I was weak, but because she always knew I was not. As I pressed my palm against the cold window, a strange peace washed through me. Tomorrow was not about revenge. It was about restoration. Tomorrow would show every woman who had ever been humiliated that survival is not the end of the story. Rising is. And when the clock finally struck midnight, I whispered into the darkness, "Let them underestimate me one last time." Because when the weakest woman in the room learns her worth, she becomes the most dangerous force they will ever face. The morning of the board meeting arrived wrapped in a stillness so sharp it felt almost ceremonial. I woke before my alarm, before the sun, before the world could remind me of the woman I used to be. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that exists before a storm. Not violent, but transformative. I moved through my parents' living room with deliberate calm, letting the soft hum of the heater and the distant song of early birds anchor me to the purpose of the day. My mother met me in the kitchen, her robe tied loosely at the waist, a steaming cup of café con leche already waiting on the table. She didn't ask if I was ready. She didn't need to. She just placed her warm hand over mine and whispered, "Today, mija, you walk into the room that tried to break you, but you will not enter as who you were. You enter as who you became." I nodded, letting her words cloak me like invisible armor. My father joined us a few minutes later, already dressed in a sharp navy suit. He kissed my forehead and looked at me with the kind of steadiness that comes from decades of surviving what others said he could never have. "We're all waiting in the car," he said softly, "but you will walk in alone." And I understood. Some journeys require witnesses. Others require solitude. By the time we arrived at the Harrington corporate tower, the sun was climbing, casting a golden glare across the glass facade. Reporters were clustered near the entrance, shouting questions about the rumored takeover. Nobody knew the truth yet. Nobody suspected me. Cameras flashed like lightning. Microphones pushed through the crowd, voices echoing in chaotic unison. Who is the new majority shareholder? Is the company facing bankruptcy? Is the Harrington family stepping down? Security escorted me through a private side entrance, and the moment the heavy glass doors closed behind me, silence fell once again. My heels clicked gently against the polished marble floors. Steady, precise, controlled. I walked past portraits of the Harrington founders, every frame dripping with self-importance. They had built their legacy on the illusion of superiority, believing that money could buy immortality. But even empires rot from the inside when they are built on cruelty. When I entered the executive wing, the board members were already gathered outside the conference room, huddled in tight circles of panic. Some looked pale. Some looked angry. Some looked exhausted from nights spent trying to salvage a sinking ship. My presence drew confused glances, polite, distant, dismissive. They had always seen me that way, as someone's wife, as someone insignificant. And that was exactly why this moment carried so much power. The door opened, and the room fell silent. My mother-in-law sat at the head of the long table, wearing a pristine cream suit and a pair of diamond earrings designed to intimidate. Her posture was rigid, her chin raised, her eyes sharp with entitlement she still believed she possessed. Her son, my almost ex-husband, sat beside her, jaw tight, eyes swollen, as if sleep had abandoned him days ago. When they saw me step inside, a ripple of confusion spread across the room. "What is she doing here?" Melissa hissed, her voice low but drenched in venom. One of the board members cleared his throat nervously. "Mrs. Harrington, the majority shareholder sent a representative. I assume that's her." She scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her. "Her? Don't be ridiculous. She doesn't belong in this meeting." "Actually," the attorney began cautiously, "she is fully authorized to be here. The majority shareholder insisted." The majority shareholder? Her eyes flickered in irritation, but she hid it behind a brittle smile. "Fine," she said. "Let's make this quick. We have a hostile takeover to stop." I took my seat, not at the edge of the table where guests usually sat, but directly across from her. An intentional choice, a quiet statement. The CEO began the meeting with a trembling voice. "As you all know, our company has been under intense strain due to recent market shifts, legal complications, and a rapid consolidation of shares by an unidentified investor. Today, we meet to discuss the identity of that investor, their intentions, and the future of Harrington Holdings." My mother-in-law leaned forward, lacing her fingers tightly. "Whoever they are," she said coldly, "they have no idea what they're dealing with. This company has survived 3 decades under my leadership." The CFO coughed awkwardly. "Actually, Melissa, they own 71% of the voting rights." A visible shiver broke across her face. 71? She repeated, voice cracking slightly. "That's impossible." The attorney opened a folder. "They provided full documentation. It's all legitimate." Then he turned to me. "Would you like to reveal your identity now?" A long, deep silence fell, the kind that makes time feel suspended. I looked gently around the table, at the men who had laughed during the wine incident, at the executives who ignored my voice for years, at the woman who once poured red humiliation down my skin like I was nothing but dirt beneath her heels. Then I spoke. Calm, clear, unshaken. "There is no representative," I said. "I am the majority shareholder." The air split open. My mother-in-law jolted to her feet, her chair screeching violently against the polished floor. "You!" she shouted. "You are behind this? You think you can take my company?" I held her gaze, letting my stillness speak for me. "It was never yours," I replied softly. "It just took someone strong enough to tell you." "No," she sputtered. "You're lying. This is impossible. Someone like you." "Someone like me?" I repeated, tilting my head slightly. "Someone you thought beneath you? Someone you humiliated? Someone whose silence you mistook for weakness?" She froze, her breath caught between rage and disbelief. I continued, my voice steady as water flowing over stone. You poured wine on my head to make me small. You forgot that women like me, women who come from generations of struggle and survival, don't stay small. We learn, we rise, we wait. The boardroom stayed utterly still. My husband finally spoke, voice breaking. Why? Why would you do this? I felt no anger toward him anymore, only truth. Because power built on cruelty deserves to fall. And because your family needed to learn that dignity does not come from pedigree or wealth, it comes from how you treat people. My mother-in-law collapsed back into her chair, her face ashen, her hands trembling. As the meeting continued, vote after vote was cast. In my favor, changes in leadership, new ethics policies, removal of toxic executives, restructuring authority. By the end of the hour, the Harrington dynasty no longer existed. And when I stood to leave, I let my final words glide through the room like a quiet prophecy. The woman you tried to humiliate is now the woman who owns everything you used to measure your worth. Let that be the lesson you carry into whatever future you have left. Then I walked out, not triumphantly, not arrogantly, but with the calm certainty of a woman who had reclaimed her power with silence, strategy, and grace. When I stepped out of the boardroom, the hallway felt colder than before, as if the air itself was adjusting to the shift in power. The world hadn't changed in appearance. Same polished floors, same gold-framed artwork, same scent of eucalyptus from the overpriced diffusers. But something fundamental in its energy had snapped. For years, this building belonged to the Harringtons. Their arrogance lived in its walls. Their entitlement seeped into its carpets. Their cruelty echoed in every meeting room. But now, the empire that once laughed at my pain was collapsing beneath its own weight, and I didn't even have to raise my voice to make it happen. Behind me, shouting erupted. Doors slammed, papers rustled angrily. My mother-in-law's voice, once sharp enough to slice the air, was cracking under the pressure of reality. "This isn't over!" she screamed at someone. "Do you hear me? It can't be!" But the desperation in her words sounded more like a plea than a threat. And it didn't matter whether she believed it. The era she built was over. My father was waiting in the lobby, his hands in his coat pockets, posture calm, eyes steady. He didn't need to ask how the meeting went. He could see it in the way I walked, the way my shoulders no longer bent under invisible weight, the way my breath flowed more freely. He simply nodded once in acknowledgement. "Así se hace," he murmured. "That is how it is done." As we stepped through the glass doors, a wave of cameras and reporters surged forward. Microphones thrust toward us like reaching hands. "Who is the new owner? Is the Harrington dynasty finished? Ma'am, are you connected to the takeover?" Their voices layered over each other like a rising tide. But I kept walking, letting security clear a path. I didn't need to address the world yet. The truth would reveal itself in time, and when it did, it would not be because I sought attention. It would be because power speaks even in silence. That afternoon, while the press scrambled to find answers, the consequences inside the Harrington family began to unfold. My husband, still reeling from the meeting, showed up at my parents' house, disheveled, eyes pleading, shirt wrinkled as if he hadn't slept. When my father opened the door, he stiffened at the sight of him. But my father, always the gentleman, stepped aside and allowed him in. Some lessons must be learned face to face. He found me in the living room, reviewing transition documents with our legal team. He stood there for a long moment, just watching me, as if trying to reconcile the woman he thought he married with the woman now orchestrating the fall of his family. "Can we talk?" he whispered. I closed the folder gently and turned to him. "About what?" He swallowed. "About everything." He sat across from me, elbows on his knees, his hands trembling. "I didn't know you were capable of all this," he said quietly. "You never told me your family had this kind of power." His voice held disbelief, fear, and something else. Something like shame. I studied him, remembering the man who once promised partnership, but delivered silence when I needed protection the most. "If I had told you," I replied, "would you have treated me differently?" His face answered before his mouth could. He looked down at his hands. "I'm losing everything," he whispered. "My mother, the company, my name. It's all falling apart." His voice cracked, and I feel like I'm falling with it. I felt a faint ache in my chest, not for him, but for the version of me who once depended on him. "You're not falling because of me," I said softly. "You're falling because you built your life on someone else's cruelty." He looked up, eyes shining with a pain he didn't know how to carry. "Can we fix it?" he asked. "You and me?" For a moment, a quiet stillness settled between us. Then I shook my head gently. "You didn't stand beside me when it mattered. And now you're asking me to stand beside you after the world has shown you who your family really is." His breath hitched. "I'm sorry." I gave him a soft, sad smile. "I hope someday that apology finds the right person inside you. But it's not for me anymore." When he left, he carried with him not just the loss of his family's empire, but the loss of the woman he assumed would always be waiting. Sometimes punishment is not fire or fury. Sometimes punishment is absence. Inside the Harrington mansion, the collapse was even more dramatic. Melissa, once the queen of her own universe, found herself locked out of crucial bank accounts. The board had frozen her authority. Her credit lines were suspended pending investigation. And with the takeover now officially announced, several federal agencies reopened cases she had buried under money and influence. According to an insider who messaged me discreetly, she screamed for hours, called her lawyers, called her friends, called her country club. But money buys silence, not loyalty. The moment her power slipped, so did everyone around her. They turned away with polite distance, as though her downfall were contagious. Her sister reportedly told her, "You should have been kinder." A sentence that struck her harder than any lawsuit ever could. Her social circle, the same people who laughed when wine poured down my dress, issued statements distancing themselves from her. She had built a kingdom on fear, but fear evaporates quickly when the throne vanishes. Her empire was gone. Her influence was gone. Her legacy was gone. And the woman she once mocked was now the name whispered in every financial headline. By the end of the week, every major network aired the same breaking news. Harrington Holdings acquired by private, Latina-owned investment collective. A headline that echoed through a country not accustomed to seeing women like me in positions of ultimate power. Some celebrated, some criticized, some questioned, but none could deny what had happened. None could deny what I had become. That evening, as the sun dipped low and cast warm amber light into my parents' living room, my mother wrapped her arm around me as we watched the news coverage. "You didn't destroy them," she whispered. "You revealed them," my father added quietly, "and you showed them that the weakest person in the room was simply the most underestimated." I looked at the screen, at the headlines bearing my name, at the downfall of the family that once used humiliation as a hobby, and I felt a deep, steady peace wash over me. Not triumph, not ego, just peace. Because justice had been served, not loudly, not violently, but through the soft, deliberate actions of a woman they never saw coming. Their fall wasn't my victory. My rise was. Taking control of the company should have felt like standing on top of some unreachable mountain. But in truth, the first morning I walked into the executive office with my name etched onto the glass door, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like responsibility. Heavy, sacred, and strangely gentle. I paused in front of that glass for a long moment, letting my fingers trace the smooth letters. This wasn't just a title. It was reclamation. It was a quiet rewriting of a story others tried to author for me. And as I stepped inside, the world seemed to adjust, not out of fear, not out of awe, but out of recognition. I was finally stepping into the space life had been shaping me for without my permission. The office still carried remnants of Melissa's reign: cold marble, sharp metallic accents, an energy that had always felt sterile and performative. It wasn't just decor, it was a reflection of her leadership, impressive from afar, hollow up close. I opened the windows, letting in fresh air, sunlight, and a sense of cleansing I didn't realize I needed. The city stretched beneath me, alive and imperfect, full of people whose stories deserved more than the indifference the Harringtons had shown them. It reminded me of who I wanted to be now. Not someone who ruled from a pedestal, but someone who led from the ground, with intention and heart. My first act as owner was simple. I listened. I met with employees from every floor, operators, assistants, cleaners, analysts, inviting them one by one into a space that had never belonged to them before. Their surprise was almost painful to witness. Some hesitated to sit. Some apologized for taking too long to explain their ideas. Some spoke with fear, glancing at the door as if expecting the old leadership to burst in and reprimand them. It told me everything I needed to know about the culture Melissa had built. A culture of intimidation, a culture of hierarchy, a culture where people existed to serve, not to contribute. I took notes. I remembered names. I made promises I intended to keep. Change didn't have to roar. It could begin with something as small as making people feel seen. Within a week, I announced the formation of a new Ethics and Equity Council, made up not of executives, but of regular employees. People who had been overlooked now held the power to guide how we rebuilt the company's values. The room erupted in applause when I told them. Some even cried. And I felt something shift in my chest, something warm and grounding. This, I realized, was the real beginning, not the takeover, not the vote. This. Of course, not everyone embraced the change. Some former allies of the Harrington family resigned immediately, unwilling to adapt to a world where kindness and accountability mattered more than intimidation. Others tried to manipulate, to undermine, to whisper doubts into dark corners. But I didn't need to fight them. Their resistance made them irrelevant. And irrelevance is a far sharper punishment than anything I could have crafted. One afternoon, during a leadership workshop I hosted for managers, a young Latina employee approached me with shy determination. "I just wanted to say," she whispered, "that seeing you up there, it makes me believe there's space for someone like me in places like this." Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes held a fire that felt achingly familiar. I touched her arm gently. "Mija," I said softly, "you don't need to fit into the space they give you. You build your own, and you make them adjust." She nodded, tears shimmering, and in that moment, I saw myself years ago, trying to survive a world determined to shrink me. Now, I was helping expand it. Beyond the company walls, my legacy stretched further than I expected. Advocacy groups reached out, women's organizations asked me to speak, networks invited me to panels about leadership and resilience. I declined most of them, not because I wasn't grateful, but because my legacy wasn't about becoming a public figure. My legacy was about what I built, quietly, steadily, meaningfully. So instead, I created something far more personal, a scholarship fund for young women of color pursuing business degrees named after my mother and my grandmother. I built partnerships with community centers to provide internships to students who had never set foot in a corporate building. And every time our company signed a new contract, a percentage was routed to programs supporting survivors of workplace discrimination. It wasn't charity, it was balance, a restoration of what had long been denied. In the midst of rebuilding, I also began rebuilding myself. Healing isn't linear. Some mornings I woke feeling powerful. Others, I woke remembering the sting of wine running down my neck, the sound of laughter cutting into my dignity. But each day, the memory softened, not erased, just transformed. Pain became fuel. Humiliation became direction, and silence, the silence that once trapped me, became the silence I now chose as a tool. One evening, after a long day of restructuring meetings, I found myself alone in the gala hall inside the building. Yes, the same hall where the Christmas party had taken place, where Melissa had tried to break me in front of hundreds of people. I hadn't planned to come here. I simply wandered and ended up standing beneath the same crystal chandelier that once spotlighted my humiliation. I stood there for a long time, breathing deeply, letting the echoes of that night replay. Not as wounds, but as evidence of who I had become since. That night had been the end of something, a threshold, a reckoning, a baptism by fire and humiliation that led me here to a place of unimaginable strength. I walked to the exact spot on the marble where the wine had hit the floor. I imagined the red stain spreading like a wound beneath my shoes. But when I looked down now, there was nothing. No stain, no memory except the one I carried within me. And inside, I finally whispered to the version of myself who once stood trembling in this room, "You made it." My phone buzzed. It was my father, reminding me dinner was waiting. I took one last look around the room, not in anger, not in triumph, but in gratitude. Because without this moment of cruelty, I might never have discovered the power sleeping in my bloodline, in my family, in my own voice. As I turned off the lights and walked out of the hall, I didn't close the door gently. I closed it with purpose. Not as a woman escaping humiliation, but as a woman building a legacy. A legacy shaped not by revenge, but by transformation. Not by ruling over others, but by elevating those who were once ignored. A legacy built by a woman whose silence had finally become her greatest strength. A full year passed before I stepped into that ballroom again. Not because I was avoiding it, and not because the memories still stung, but because time has a way of softening the edges of old wounds until they no longer feel sharp. I didn't return as some symbolic victory lap. I returned because life, in its curious symmetry, had brought me back for a purpose I could no longer ignore. The Civil Rights Alliance had invited me as their keynote speaker and honoree, recognizing the quiet ways I had reshaped the culture of a corporate world that once tried to erase women like me. I hesitated at first. The idea of standing in the same room where humiliation once tried to define me felt almost surreal. But something inside whispered, "Go, not to relive, but to reclaim." So I did. When I arrived, the doors were already open, and warm golden light spilled into the foyer like a welcome I would never have received before. I paused for just a moment at the threshold, breathing in the faint scent of evergreen and polished marble. The same scent from that night, but somehow different now, softer, almost nostalgic. Then I walked in. Conversations hushed, faces turned, but this silence was nothing like the one that followed the wine splashing down my face. This silence carried respect, curiosity, admiration. The air didn't weigh on me, it lifted me. The chandeliers above me glittered, as if remembering the girl who once stood beneath it, trembling, but unbroken. And now, the same girl walked with her shoulders open, her chin high, her spirit steady. My dress, a deep crimson silk, flowed behind me like a soft flame, and in its movement, it felt like I was carrying every version of myself forward in one long, sweeping stride. I saw familiar faces among the crowd. Some smiled warmly, some watched in awe, and some, those who once found pleasure in my pain, looked away, unable to meet my eyes, not out of fear, but because the truth of who I had become reflected too brightly against who they had chosen to be. Front and center, my mother and father sat at the first table, their posture proud, their eyes glistening with the kind of joy that comes only when parents watch their child step fully into herself. My mother pressed her hand over her heart when our eyes met, whispering something that looked like, "Mi niña," even from across the room. My father lifted his glass slightly, not in celebration, but in acknowledgement. They knew this moment wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about a full circle transformation. As I approached the stage, I spotted someone else, my ex-husband, sitting near the back of the room. His suit was pressed, his hair groomed, but nothing could hide the hollowness behind his eyes. He wasn't there as my guest, nor as someone seeking closure. He was simply another attendee in a world that had moved on without him. He watched me with a mixture of guilt and disbelief, as if still trying to understand how the woman he once underestimated had risen so quietly, so completely. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. He simply nodded, small, almost imperceptible, not asking for forgiveness, not offering apology, just acknowledging the truth. And that was enough. The room fell silent when I reached the podium. I took a breath, allowing the quiet to settle, not to dramatize, but to honor the weight of the moment. Then I began, my voice slow, deep, steady, like it had been carried by generations of women before me. 1 year ago, I said, I stood in this very room on a night that was supposed to celebrate unity and accomplishment. Instead, it became a night that revealed everything that was broken, not just in a family, not just in a company, but in a system that allowed cruelty to pass as power. A ripple moved through the audience. Some bowed their heads, some looked at me with tenderness. That night taught me something, I continued. Humiliation is not the moment you're brought low. Humiliation is the moment others reveal who they truly are. I paused, letting the truth settle. And rising isn't about revenge. It's about remembering that dignity cannot be taken, only forgotten, and that we have the right to reclaim it. My mother's eyes glistened. My father's jaw tightened with emotion. And somewhere in the back, my ex-husband blinked hard, as if holding back something fragile. I went on. When a woman stands in silence, people assume she is weak. But silence is not emptiness. Silence is strategy. Silence is listening. Silence is the breath before the match is struck. Soft murmurs moved through the crowd. They knew. They understood. I spoke of rebuilding the company, not with profit as the anchor, but with humanity. I spoke of elevating voices long ignored, of transforming systems designed to keep certain people out. I spoke of women of color stepping into spaces once denied to them. And I spoke of legacy, not the one built by wealth, but the one built by truth. Then I said the line that had been forming in my heart for months. A quiet woman is not a powerless woman. She is simply holding her match. And when she decides to strike it, she doesn't burn the room. She lights the path. The applause began slowly, soft, steady, rising like a tide, then blossomed into something thunderous, something alive, not for the fall of an empire, but for the rise of a woman who had reclaimed her voice without losing her grace. After the ceremony, people surrounded me with congratulations and gratitude. Some wanted photos, some wanted advice, some simply wanted to say thank you for standing in a way that helped them feel seen. Eventually, the crowd thinned, and I stepped outside into the cool night air. The sky was clear. The moon hung low and bright, a shimmering reminder that light doesn't have to be harsh to be powerful. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking softly against the stone. Behind me, the ballroom glowed with warm light, laughter, and music. Ahead of me stretched a quiet path illuminated by soft lanterns, gentle, resilient, enduring, just like me. As I reached the end of the walkway, I paused one last time, turned back toward the building, and whispered into the night, "Thank you." Not to the people who hurt me, but to the moment that awakened me. Because I had not been broken in that room. I had been forged. And as I stepped forward into the darkness, the truth settled into my bones with absolute certainty. I wasn't the woman fighting to survive anymore. I was the woman holding the match. And the world, whether ready or not, was finally beginning to see my fire.